I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on, putting on. Everywhere I go, I'm putting on. Putting on. Where you from?
Welcome to Popcorn Sports on the Popcorn Entertainment Network. I'm your host, Mike Kyle, and welcome to yet another episode of Why You Should Root for every team in the NBA for the 2018-2019 season. I, of course, am not alone for this series as we look to preview the Phoenix Suns today. I am joined here by Dan Volpone. He covers the Phoenix Suns over for valleyofthesuns.com. Dan, go ahead and introduce yourself. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm good, Mike. How you doing? It's nice to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to have you. I think at this point I'm now down to 8 teams or so we're coming towards the end of the series. My first question for you is, how did you begin to cover the Phoenix Suns?
Yeah, so actually, I've been a Sixers fan like most of my life. I started writing as a contributor at the Sixers Sense, which is another site on the Fansided network, and I ended up making the switch to Valley of the Sun, so I'm now an editor at that site. And I was kind of given a couple options of, if they wanted me to move up to editor, who I should write for, and I chose the Suns because, at the time they had the number 1 pick. I love Devin Booker, and, on the topic of why you should root for the Suns, he's a lot of that reason.
Yep.
And they're really on their way up, so they're going to be a lot of fun to cover and a lot of fun to watch too for this season.
What were some of your other options? Because obviously, as you said, you wrote for the Sixers Sense, and now you have the opportunity to you were a free agent writer. So
yeah.
So what played into your decision to cover the Suns besides having the number 1 pick? Was there anything else?
So my other options were, I'm trying to remember. I had 2 other options, I believe. One was, I want to say, the Mavericks, and one the Pelicans, I think. And maybe it's kind of the Sixers fan in me, but I just felt like the Suns had the most they had the most room to go up. Like, Anthony Davis is awesome, love him, but I almost feel like he's gonna be, I don't know if he even stays, and even if he does, they almost seem like stuck in the middle.
They're topped out. Yep.
Yeah, and I do like what the Mavericks have going for them. I like Dennis Smith and Luka Doncic. How could you not? But, at the time they didn't have Doncic. They had the 5th pick. It wasn't really clear where they were going. And the Suns had a lot. Like, even with some of their busts, like, guys like Alex Len didn't work out. Dragan Bender hasn't worked out. Chris is gone now. But they have so much talent either way. Josh Jackson's still there. They ended up bringing Ayton, as we thought they would. Booker is one of the best young players in the league, and all of that really drew me in. There's so much young talent to root for there.
Right, and we're going to get into all of that in just a few moments. So I kind of want to shift gears now to the general overview of the Phoenix Suns. They joined the NBA in 1968. They're called the Suns because of the blazing temperatures in Arizona. Their colors are orange and purple, which is just a really unique color scheme. They have 29 playoff appearances, 0 championships, and they play in the Pacific Division with the Clippers, Lakers, Warriors, and Kings. So now that we got the general overview out of the way, I want to talk about last season for a little bit. And so they went 21-61. They missed the playoffs in the Western Conference, and as you just said, they drafted DeAndre Ayton with the number 1 pick in this year's NBA draft. Now, I take it that you are a very, very new member in the Suns community. But what's some of your insight as to what took place last season from your research and your findings?
Well, it was really, just from the beginning, a disaster, and that was the most publicity the Suns got all season. In the national media, was the horrible things that took place at the beginning of the year, all starting with the 0-3 start, and then Eric Bledsoe's now infamous tweet from the barbershop, or at least he claimed.
The salon. Get it right, the salon.
The salon, there you go. So he said, "I don't want to be here," which was definitely about the Phoenix Suns, but and then the coach gets fired right after that. And it's just a whole mess to start the season.
Actually, it's crazy that you just brought that up, because I'm pretty sure today is the 1-year anniversary of that tweet. I'm almost positive, because I feel like somebody retweeted that on my timeline earlier this morning. So that is phenomenal. That's just perfect timing for this interview as a whole. So
yeah.
So that's the thing. It's like last season was just so cut and dry. You had the early season drama, but then after that, it was just like they're a bad team. Devin Booker's a stud, but they don't have pieces around him. And with that, that's what they really took care of this offseason for the most part. They still have a lot of holes in that roster, but they really tried to tighten them up a little bit. So, I mean, we can just quickly even shift gears now into this year's roster, and that's Devin Booker, Josh Jackson, Ayton, Michael Bridges, got Trevor Ariza, TJ Warren, who I love. They signed Jamal Charles really, really late, brought in Ryan Anderson, Troy Daniels. Kind of break down this roster for me. Who are some pieces that you really like?
So, I mean, obviously, Booker and Ayton are the two main guys to watch. They can bring in anyone they want. Those guys have to be stars if they're going to really be a team that competes, especially in the West. But as you get throughout the lineup, Trevor Ariza is going to be a great piece. Everything he does complements what the team needs. I actually wrote a piece about this the other day where he's just not even like on paper, yes, he fills their needs, right? Like he's a good defender. They didn't have good defenders last year. They couldn't hit threes last season. He's a good three-point shooter. But beyond that, he makes Devin Booker's life so much easier. There was a play on opening night where Booker drove down the lane and found Ayton Ariza open across the lane. He keeps the floor spread for Ariza, and he's almost like there's not a lot of good perimeter shooters on the Suns, like Josh Jackson, TJ Warren, the guys you mentioned. They are not known for hitting the three.
Really streaky.
But they're at least going to get more open looks with a guy like Ayton with a guy like Ariza where you can't just leave him. You can't run at someone else and then risk it being kicked back to Ariza because he's the one you don't want to shoot. And then you mentioned you love TJ Warren. He's almost a weird fit in today's NBA. He doesn't play a ton of defense, or at least not well, and he is not a great three-point shooter. He shot in the 20s last season, but he's a really good scorer, which any team can use off the bench. Like those things don't even matter so much. And he's not a horrible liability, especially if you put better players around him in those areas. And if you could, most benches, even on good teams, if they struggle, it's because they can't put up points. And he's going to be a guy where that's not going to happen. You can turn to him on the bench and he's going to score.
Right, yeah. My love for TJ Warren comes from my ACC bias. As you can tell right now, we're on call right now. I have my North Carolina crew neck on. He obviously played for North Carolina State, so I watched him time and time again over there. But so that's the thing. And here's something we can talk about. So on draft night, they drafted Zaire Smith, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I thought.
They traded. I think
they traded because it was the Michael Bridges trade. But yeah, that's what I was gonna get into. So they draft Zaire Smith and they trade him for Michael Bridges. And Michael Bridges is just like, I don't want to call him like cream of the crop at like the very top rookie, but just the way he's built, his skill set, he just really contributes a lot to today's NBA. So what do you think your expectations and just the overall ceiling for him is?
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting because he did play. He played 11 and a half seconds opening night. They really just put him in at the end, which was surprising to me because, I mean, they gave up 2 first-round picks for the guy.
Right.
And they were all over him. Now, I watched a lot of him in college just because he's in market. I'm from around Philly, and so
Villanova.
When it was on TV. And he is a stud, there's no doubt. And like you said, he's definitely the prototypical 3-and-D player. When teams talk about that, hit the three at 43.5% in college last season. Obviously, the line's a little further, but he didn't really show much difficulty shooting it from further out. And he's an absolutely tremendous defender with a 7'2" wingspan at 6'7". And then throw in his athleticism, that helps even more. So he's definitely a perfect fit for today's NBA. I won't see him becoming a guy like Kawhi Leonard, who that's often the ceiling used for a 3-and-D player entering the league. It's like, what can they be Kawhi Leonard? I've heard it used for Josh Jackson too. I think no. He doesn't have I don't think he has a tight enough handle to be someone who's going to consistently go score at the basket in traffic, to create a lot of shots in the mid-range, or even become an elite playmaker in the league. That being said, I don't think he'll have any issue being an NBA player. I have no doubt he belongs in the league. And he's going to help the team, whether it's off the bench for now or if he gets moved into the starting lineup later. He's definitely going to help the team. And even though, people talk about him a lot as a guy who's, he's 22, and he's supposed to be league ready. He spent 4 years at Villanova, won 2 national championships. And he's not the freshmen that are coming in right away. Guys think of him as league ready, but to me, I actually think we need to give him a couple of years just because he's always been a late bloomer everywhere he's gone. He's always taken time to adjust. He shot in the 20s from the three-point line his freshman year at Villanova. Actually, I should say his sophomore year. I think he redshirted his freshman year. And he got that up into the 40s. He was so thin he couldn't get on the court as a sophomore. He couldn't get a ton of minutes. He was getting beat up by Josh Hart at practice. And then at the end of the season, he becomes a lottery pick. Right, so everywhere he goes, and he's a guy who's known to be very receptive to coaching. So I think if we give him time, he's going to be a real good player.
I want to take this time to just kind of still focus on the roster, but I want to talk about the new quote young core of three, the new big three for lack of better term: Devin Booker, Josh Jackson, and DeAndre Ayton. All three players have their own identity as players, which I think is really, really good for this. Booker, obviously, is a lights-out shooter. Josh Jackson is a freak athlete who can score. And DeAndre Ayton, obviously, is a great defender and just a monster post presence. So, what do you think that those three can amount to?
I think that there's no reason to believe they definitely can't become a championship core someday.
Someday.
I mean, to project that any team will be that is obviously
right. Yeah, that's not really what I'm at. Yeah, I know. I got you.
But for when you're talking ceilings, yes, I think they could have that. Booker can score from anywhere. Jackson should become a very good defender.
Right.
And if he can get his shot back to where it was in college, which again, not that surprising with a further 3-point line, a guy with not great form, he's gonna have to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And if Ayton can really be what they hope he was when they drafted him, I mean, those guys can definitely be something. Not to mention the Suns have cap space, so not right now, and probably not much next offseason unless they make a move, which I don't think they will. They're gonna have to get Ryan Anderson off the books, but there is a season in between where if they play their cards right, they would be able to free up one max contract slot, even with Jackson and Warren on the books. So there definitely is potential there. The front office is kind of in
shambles.
A state of change right now. It's kind of, I don't know what's going on. There's issues with the owner, right? But so it's hard to know what to expect from James Jones, but I'm hoping he's someone who's going to, be wise financially and understand that if they could be patient just a couple more years with the core they have, that could definitely draw a big name player. And at that point, you're talking about, at least a big three. Even if Jackson doesn't become part of a guy you would call, big, you have Jackson, Warren, and Bridges are all good role players.
Mm-hmm.
You could sign another max contract. And, I mean, with what they've invested, with Booker on a max contract, Ayton with the number one pick, they're banking on them being great players. And so if they can follow that vision, I think that's their best bet.
I think the most important thing that they did this offseason was they locked up Devin Booker early. And obviously it's the second contract where guys tend to leave, but I feel like that's the thing, there were some lingering reports that Booker was really unhappy with the organization and in the direction they were heading in. And so even for them to navigate through that and lock him up for the next 4 years, I believe it is, that's just huge because you have that cornerstone piece for the time being.
Yeah, he signed a huge extension at the beginning of the summer, 5 years, including this year. So like you said, 4 years, max extension. And yeah, they needed to keep him. He's a great player, and a lot of their hopes rest on him. And there's a lot of talk about trying to keep Booker happy because, like you said, there were reports about about Booker not necessarily being happy, especially with the losing going on. And to that, I've always said they shouldn't worry about it so much. They should think about, like you said, how are we going to make sure he's happy when his next contract comes around?
Right.
Because this offseason he was restricted. He was going to stay.
Absolutely.
In 5 years or so, right? I mean, the Pelicans, I think we could talk about the Pelicans as a good example. Anthony Davis, like we both agree, is probably going to leave. Why, right? Because they've always made moves to win now around him, right? Like they're constantly bringing in. Even this offseason, they brought in Mirotic at the deadline last year. They signed some more players over the offseason. They've extended Holiday. They've always made moves where it's like they're going to at least be challenging for the playoffs. They made it last season as an 8 seed, or not as an 8 seed. I'm sorry.
6.
As a 6 seed. They were an 8 seed early and they ended up moving up. But they've always, and that theoretically should keep them happy, right? But the goal isn't to have Booker be thrilled with the team for the next 2 years, and then once he realizes, we're never going to win anything, in 3 years after that, he's gone. It should be like, how are we going to be competing for championships? And he will stay if they're competing for championships. So make sure that you do everything you can to have your core competing in 5 seasons when you want to keep Devin Booker. Not to keep him when he can't go anywhere. Why worry about that?
Right. Extremely well said right there. Now, there's one more player I want to talk about, and then we'll shift gears out of this. But I want to talk about just DeAndre Ayton as an overall prospect and as the number 1 overall pick. You said that you signed on with Valley of the Suns because you knew that they had all the potential in the world to go on the upswing, especially with having the number 1 overall pick and taking Ayton. My question for you is, when exactly did you take the job at Valley of the Suns?
I want to say it was early June.
Okay, so it was pre-draft. Okay, this is what I want. This because where I was getting at. So the Suns hired Luka Doncic's old coach, his national team coach.
Yeah, Kosko. Yeah.
Did you want them to take Doncic? Because I've talked about this before on other episodes where Doncic has come up. Doncic was by far and away my number 1 prospect, and I always felt like there was something there, whether it was management and maybe Koskov didn't have like the backing of the organization. But why do you think that they took Ayton over a guy like Doncic, where he knew the coach and you can argue Doncic can just fit anywhere on the floor with any given team?
Yeah, Doncic is a no doubt great prospect. And I actually, when I was still writing about the Sixers, I ended up back then I wrote a piece on what should the Sixers do if they won the lottery, right? Because they had the chance to get number 1.
Right.
It was a very slim chance. It was about 1% with the Lakers pick. And obviously it didn't happen. The Suns got number 1. And for them, obviously they had Embiid. And so I said, take Doncic, be a great fit, really with anyone. And, 19 years old, was already EuroLeague MVP, won the EuroLeague finals. Like, he's no doubt a player. Like, he's a professional, and he's going to be a great player in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
I still believe that. But I didn't even really think about it once I signed on with Valley of the Suns, because they were so set on Ayton, and it was such a sure thing. And I think a lot of it has to do with so much exposure to him.
Mm-hmm.
He played high school in Arizona.
He went to Arizona.
At Arizona.
Right.
So they know him. They're clearly comfortable with him and think he's going to be a great player. I think a real argument to make is the fact that there's still no proof that centers are all that important, right? Like,
right.
Defensively, of course they are, right? Like, Joel Embiid defensively is obviously very important, but offensively, like, is that what is...
If he can't stretch the floor.
Sixers. Exactly. Like, there's obviously limitations, and while I think that will change, like, I'm not saying the big man can't come back, but if you look at the teams who are winning now, in the East is really the Celtics now that LeBron's gone, and Horford is obviously a great player, but he can stretch the floor.
Right.
He's not a typical.
He's also undersized too.
Yeah. He's not. Yeah, and then they have in the West. I mean, the Warriors win every year. They're great. They have Cousins now, but he's not the reason they've been winning.
Right.
The Rockets had Capella, who was really defense only, defense and athleticism, which is kind of been the almost like prototype at center lately. Not for high picks, but for winning teams. They just get a guy who's going to defend, and that's perfect for him. So I think there's an argument to be made that maybe Doncic is the guy to go with, but they were very comfortable with Ayton. I think a lot of his flaws in college were overstated. He was his defense was doubted coming into the league. He had a low block percentage in college, and to that I say, he played in a 2-3 zone. What did you really want him to do? He has the athleticism to defend out to the perimeter. He slides his feet really well for a big man. And he's obviously, which is to be expected, he's not perfect mindset-wise in post defense yet, but he also doesn't have a ton of experience there, and he definitely showed that he can defend the paint and block shots, which is a good sign. So I think his defense is good. He's got a smooth jumper. He's going to be a guy who is going to score the basketball, whereas Doncic is not so much that. He averaged in the teens overseas. And I think they liked Ayton scoring a lot as well. I think all of that together was scoring and defense were probably, I mean, that's pretty much the whole game, right? But the Suns were the worst. They were the worst offense. They had the worst offensive rating and the worst defensive rating in the league last year.
So they just needed to get a guy that can just fill both.
They needed a guy to be a guy, right? Like they weren't going to have someone that's going to be like, well, let's just pass to like Doncic is a great facilitator, but there's not a lot of other great players. So I think they see Ayton as a guy who's going to be like that guy.
All right. So that covers the roster. I feel like we just talked about nearly everybody. I want to talk now about the fan base, the culture, and the fun surrounding the Phoenix Suns. Because as we've talked about, like, they're just a team that's trying to turn it around and begin their uphill battle in the Western Conference. They've been in tank mode for the past few years. They have their young core, like we just talked about. What's been your very short experience with Suns fans?
Suns fans are growing impatient for sure. And I don't mean that in a bad way. But they are ready to win. And I think that's a good thing. They're definitely not used to having lost all this much. I mean, before all these losing seasons, you know, they were just fresh off of Nash and Stoudemire and Marion and Joe Johnson and all of it came with that. And now all of a sudden they're winning 21 games. They hadn't had much luck in the lottery up until they got the number 1 pick. They hadn't had a pick higher than 4, even with, you know, the tank full-blown, not disguised. And that was frustrating to a lot of fans because it felt like they weren't making the progress they needed. And they're ready to win. Like, they have the pieces in place. They're not going to make the playoffs this year.
No.
Right? But they have the pieces in place that they can finally look at the guys on the team and be like, this is who we're going to win with. Right? Like, these guys are not here for this season. These guys are not projects that they took on. You know, like Bender and Chris were never guarantees. Sorry about that.
You're good.
Bender and Chris were never guarantees, right? And so now these guys, it's like we're looking at Ayton, they're looking at Booker and saying, these guys, we know they're going to be good. These are the guys we're going to win with. And there's definitely a lot of excitement for the team.
What do you think these next few years are going to look like? Obviously, we've talked about this climb that they're going to try and attempt. But what do you think that visually looks like, especially being like in terms of maybe let's just say culture and dynamics within like the fans? Because obviously, all right, so I can give you an example. I'm from Cleveland, okay? I still live here, whatever, blah blah blah. So I've seen, especially from the past 4 years, the Cavs get LeBron again, and all of a sudden, you shoot from the bottom of the East to the very top. Now, that is super unlike nearly any other team, because it's very, very infrequent that the best player of all time, I say, just randomly, good. It's not often that the best player of all time just jumps on your team and can propel you to the top. Yeah. And so, what do you think this journey looks like for the Suns, who are going to kind of just have to do everything backwards?
Yeah, it's going to be not much like many success stories in the NBA, right? Like, there are very few teams that are consistent lottery teams that come out on top. Sixers being an exception, but then again, the Suns aren't going to jump from 20-some wins, which they had last year, to the 52 the Sixers had.
Right.
So that's not going to be the case for this team, especially because I don't see them finishing higher than 10th. I think that would be a great season if they won 35 games and were, 10th in the West. And that's not even close to the playoffs. I mean, last season in the West, 9 teams won 46 or more games. Now LeBron's on a team that didn't even do that. So you have 10 teams you figure that finish ahead of him, at least. But when you talk about the journey up, I think it's really just going to be increasing goals each year. Even if they don't make big acquisitions, their guys are going to get better. So, this season I think they aim for 35. I'm not sure they hit it, but I think it's a reasonable goal. I think you have to be happy with even like a 32, 33 win season. I think that would show a lot of growth, especially in Devin Booker, because they're not going to be blowing teams out. So that would be a lot of experience closing games. I think even losses are great ways to get experience in the NBA. People talk about like, oh, why don't you go acquire this guy, try to make the playoffs, help your young players. I don't think that's the only way to do it. I think that young guys can develop in all sorts of ways. I think after this season, we have a much better idea of what the team's going to look like with a new coach, how the young players that we just talked about are all going to fit together. I mean, Ayton's a huge piece, and he's brand new, so they got to figure that out. And hopefully they'll have another draft pick that's, solid. And so that'll help the team even more. I think they shoot for 500 as early as next season with all the pieces they have there. And then as soon as that's done, I mean, you have to be looking towards the playoffs, I think, within the next 3 seasons. I think they have that kind of talent. Booker's already in his 4th season in the league, right? So you're talking about 3 years from now, he's going to be in his 6th year. So he's definitely going to be experienced enough to take a team to the playoffs. And when you talk about getting to the top of the West, a lot has to do with just timing, not even related to the Suns, right? Like, there's never going to be another Warriors. There might, I really hope not. But they're going to have to break up or get old or get hurt or something, because they're not going to beat themselves. At least how they stand now. The Rockets are still loaded. Guys are getting older. If Paul retires, things like that, that could change. I think they have just as much talent as the Nuggets, who I think are the best up-and-coming team right now. I think the Nuggets are just a few years ahead, but I don't think they're any less talented. So I think once the older guys in the West start to either decline or retire, or who knows, maybe some guys finally make a move east, then the Suns really start their climb about 3 years from now.
All right, extremely well said, and I like that 3-year time frame that you have laid out, especially when they won 21 games last season to bump them up to 35 or so this year. I feel like that's just a really good pace for them. So I want to wrap it up with this. You have 30 seconds to pitch anybody why they should be a fan of the Phoenix Suns this season. Go ahead.
All right. Devin Booker is the most exciting young player in the league. He was top 10 in scoring last year. He was only 21. DeAndre Ayton is one of the most promising young big men in the NBA. The Suns have some of the most exciting rotation players in the league, including lots of three-point shooters. There's athletes throughout the roster. They have a new coach, new players. They play great teams over and over again in the West. Winning is not all that important this year, so it's all fun. You don't have to stress in these games. The players are a lot of fun to watch, and the team is going to be great in a few years, so make sure you hop on the bandwagon before they are the team everyone wants to root for.
I love it. Extremely well said, Dan. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dan Valpone. You can follow him on Twitter at Dan_Valpone. He covers the Phoenix Suns for ValleyOfTheSuns.com. Dan, you got anything else to plug, man?
That's it, but I appreciate you having me on, and let's root for the Suns.
Absolutely. Hey, if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. We're doing this for every team in the NBA. We've covered 21 teams already, so be sure to check those and stick around for the future episodes coming later this week and next week. And with that, we'll see you next time.